Have you been one of those families that have always worked, taken any job you could possibly get your hands in? Are you on the other side of the fence? Actually, you think working is a bit of a mug's game, and you have quite a nice life, thank you very much.
I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people who are like that, Michelle. Most of these people are called landlords, right? If we're going to talk about the economically inactive who have a very nice life whilst not working, these are called traders, aristocrats, and landlords. Landlords are peak economically inactive.
Living off the state. Well, today we've got new...
Which is, ironically, she's referring to people who are on welfare here, right? But of course, lots of landlords do live off the state because they charge like sky-high fucking rents because they're greedy bastards that people can't afford to pay them, so they get it topped up with housing benefit. So we literally have the state doing landlord subsidy. They really do live the easiest, most pampered life possible whilst not lifting a finger or doing any work at all. Landlords do, don't they?
Unemployment figures, and get this, ladies and gents, the unemployment rate in this country has hit its highest level in almost 4 years. We're now...
I mean, for the entirety of that 4 years, it's already been record low, right? So let's just put this into perspective. UK unemployment rate 1945 to 2024, you know? But this is it from the year 2000, right? This is from the turn of the millennium up till now. Really, it's still around between the 4.5%, between 4 and 5%, really. Like, it's round about 5% now, just off 5%. But that's historically much lower than it was in, like, for example, the post-financial crisis period, and even then before the Blair administration. If we look at the historical unemployment in the post-war period, right? You can see here that actually, once you look at the 1970s, it's been above, you know, it was like 13%. It's been way, way above. If you go up here into the year 2000 here, it's always historically been above this level. So historically, like, you have to go back to the 70s for unemployment to be this low. It's just higher than it was during the pandemic period when there was a hot labour market.
Now up from 4.5% to 4.6%. This is for the period of time, the 3 months to April. This is not a good picture because I've got to tell you as well, vacancy numbers, they also as well have declined. Baroness Jacqueline Foster, what do you think to this? We've seen some new policies from the Labour Party. Is this the effect of those kind of things? Is it something different? Your thoughts?
Well, it's a combination. The big kick-off really was the budget last year, and you know, if anybody thinks that they're going to get growth in an economy by hammering those that actually create most of the jobs, which are the small and medium-sized businesses, which are the sort of 85% of the engine room with the supply chains that run this economy.
I mean, demand is what creates jobs. We are seeing at least some increase in demand right now. That's not translated to vacancies yet, but as that economic growth that we've got in the first quarter of the year comes through, we should be seeing more vacancies soon. Of course, we also have a problem in that we have a lot of labour shortages in some sectors, which means places are just closing down anyway because they can't get the workers.
Then they're frankly disillusioned to, without any notice, increase the minimum wage, to increase the national insurance, which obviously affects not just that contribution, but those that are eligible for pensions. The benefits system, quite frankly, needs to be tackled because there are far too many people on benefits who shouldn't be on benefits, and far too many...
I mean, source, everyone keeps saying this, they never ever provide any evidence or any justification. It just is essentially groupthink and received wisdom on the right that at any point, at any time, there are always too many people on benefits. They never quantify this, they never qualify this, especially, as I said, when unemployment may have gone up recently by a small amount, is still historically very, very low, and in broad market economies is basically at the point of the Nauru anyway, just above maybe. Like, it's not a huge problem.
Many people of working age who should actually be working. And so you've got a combination, actually, of issues here. And also, you know, that she managed to find a lot of money for the public sector, but there was no quid pro quo. I'm a former trade union negotiator. I understand the responsibility when you're actually doing paying conditions. And I hope that the crew who I negotiated for at the time certainly had very good reward. But nevertheless, there is a responsibility. And I don't think that this government understood that there was a responsibility to do that. And then in addition, just these other issues, you know, the Chagos Islands.
First of all, Chagos Islands, shut up. Like, no one cares. Only a baroness who's getting free meals in her time in robes in the House of Lords, has the time to care about the Chagos Islands, right? Instant level of total disconnectedness from reality of people on the ground for a Tory Baroness, of course, right? The other point she was making about, oh, well, if you're a trade unionist, you're getting a pay deal from the government and a pay rise, that should come with extra productivity. I'm like, no, it's a productivity if it's a real terms pay rise, right? If you're giving someone a real terms pay rise, perfectly reasonable to expect an increase in productivity, an increase in output. These are not pay rises. This is pay restoration because of inflation eating away into people's pay. They're getting paid less in real terms currently, even after the pay increases, because of the inflation eating away at the value of their wages. So actually, in real terms, it's still lower. So there absolutely should be zero productivity increase expectations at all, because they're not getting a pay rise. Right? Maybe going up in nominal terms, but in real terms, it's still not high enough to even reach pay restoration. In some sectors of the economy, not even to reach pay restoration from 2010, which is what people like the resident doctors wanting to get out of the state. They probably won't get it, they're in a negotiating position, but regardless, that's the point we're at here. It's only a pay rise if it increases in real terms, rather than just in nominal terms.
You know, paying to give away territory that we actually own, with no justification for Mauritius to take over.
Apart from the ICJ judgment, the international rules-based order, oh no, of course, these are right-wingers, rules only apply to other people.
And, Ed Miliband with his, carbon capture and literally billions on all sorts of, I suppose, projects, really, that we don't really have any insight for, and we have no guarantee that it's going to be working.
Curtis?
I agree with a lot what you say there, actually. Where I disagree is the benefit side. I'll get to that. But the problem we have, you're absolutely right. Excuse me. It's my phone, sorry.
It's breaking the place already. He's only been sat here for 2 seconds. Go on.
You won't have me back on, will you?
Go on.
So you're right that small businesses, medium-sized businesses are really struggling. And they are competing against large corporations. I think that's a real big factor here. What's interesting, I think, to me, is the fact that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's growth plan is pathetic because they are tinkering around the edges. They're not looking at growth in a holistic way. When you watch TV, you hear politicians and people in the media say, growth, growth, growth. Well, we're the fastest growing economy in the G7. A lot of people go, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Because growth doesn't mean anything to your average person. What's happening is corporations can be posting record profits, or consumer debt is another thing that goes into growth. So basically, if ordinary working class or middle class people are poorer because they're borrowing more, that adds into the total value of growth. That's not
And that's where the majority of our growth came in the post-2010 period. It wasn't public-led investment growth, it was private debt consumption growth. And whilst consumption growth is fine, I absolutely am in favour of demand-side politics. I believe in expansionary policy. I believe in full employment, which Tories don't, right? Tories believe the only way to get full employment is to essentially punish workless people until they're in destitution, so they're forced to work for pennies on the pound, humping shit for Uber Eats, right? Whereas I believe in full employment through expansionary policy, through demand-side policy, through job guarantees, through investment in the population to skill them into the position where they can get a high-paying job, for example. I believe in interventionist policy to get people back into the workforce rather than supply-side policy, which is a race to the bottom. And it doesn't lead to growth, because if you kneecap the consumption power of workers to force people back into the labour market through supply-side policy, they haven't got enough money to spend in the businesses who you say are the backbone of the economy, right? The IMF have specifically said that wage growth is the biggest factor in growing economies in European countries. So if the government really want to see people having the consumptive power to spend on the small businesses to keep them afloat, even with the national insurance tax rises, which is absolutely reasonable because we need to have investment in the NHS so that people can be well enough to work and be productive, then you want to do expansionary policy. Go full Biden. Start doing these big fiscal budgets that put money in the hands of consumers.
Necessarily good thing. What we need to be looking at is a growth which is either bottom up or middle out. How do you do that? You have to tackle gross levels of inequality. Now, this is not about being... it's not about fairness or the politics of envy. It's about saying we need more money in average people's pockets so they can go out and spend. What's happening is a lot of people are spending all the money on rent and mortgages.
People and give it to poorer people.
Yeah, but obviously, when I say rich, who do you imagine?
No, well, I don't know, because I'm not proposing it. You tell me.
So for me, I'm not talking about those who've done quite well, those who've grown their businesses. I'm talking about the billionaire class and the corporations.
I think it's important as well to try and delineate between the high earners and the wealthy. This is where I think that the understanding publicly gets lost, is that high earners pay a lot of tax, and they are people who go to work and be productive. The wealthy are usually the unproductive, the speculators, the asset owners, and that's who we want to tax. That's who a wealth tax would target: property owners, landholders, people who are part of the aristocracy. That's where I want to see the most tax levied at. Wealthy asset owners, not rich high earners, right? Even though I think we should probably increase tax on everybody, including high earners, but the lion's share of where we put increases in the overall rate of tax should be levied specifically at the wealthy, the super rich, right? Not just people who have, £100,000 a year jobs, whatever it is, even though they should be paying at least slightly more tax.
And I don't want to look at increasing income taxes necessarily. It should be about a wealth tax, because if we don't do anything about it, it's going to get worse. Now, what's interesting what you said about benefits, I know there's this pervasive idea. I just want to make that point
Let him
quickly.
finish his point. She's about to spontaneously combust, but hang on. Go on, finish your point.
There is this pervasive idea that, well, we need to cut benefits to force people into work. And you can understand the logic there. It makes sense, right? What's interesting is in Denmark, they have a higher labour rate of participation, which a fancy phrase of more working age people are in work than the UK. In 2022, it was like 80%, 2024, 75%. Look at the UK, only 53% of people in work, yet Denmark have a far higher or far generous welfare state. So there's actually no correlation between cutting benefits or reforming welfare to get people into work. You need to look at the entire economy holistically and rebalance it so people can participate in the economy in a more meaningful way.
And that's the thing, right? Why stick? Why not have some actual carrot here? Why not have better wages, better workers' rights, making it so that people who do get off of welfare into work aren't pissing in bottles in an Amazon delivery truck, which is the reality of people in the service sector economy in this country, because we gutted investment, we gutted research and development, we gutted all of the necessary speculative investments from the public sector to try and create better ways of working, productivity increases, and good jobs for everybody. Whereas we've just been left with fulfillment centres and call centres and Uber Eats as the sole place where people can go to work if they don't have skills. And there are plenty of unskilled jobs in countries with better trade union rights and with stronger or more innovative economies in, for example, Scandinavia than we do, right? Probably much better working in a McDonald's in Denmark, who earns more in real terms than someone who works in, like, a high-tech car manufacturing industry in America. You can literally be flipping burgers in Denmark, but you have such a good wages, you get paid more than a mechanic for Honda in an American factory, right? So this imbalance in terms of how income gets distributed between capital and labour is the root cause of this problem. It's why people can't consume. It's why people are not encouraged to get into work, because work doesn't pay well and the conditions suck. And people are like, well, why aren't you not pissing in bottles for Amazon? I'm like, well, not a really attractive proposal, is it? And once your benefits get cut for being workless, you're more likely to fall into things like disability, and you're more likely to claim for things like poor mental health as a result of your falling living standards because you failed to be given a decent welfare payment. And on top of this as well, it just kneecaps the ability of people to be in the position to find work, to travel to interviews, to be able to get themselves educated, to be able to do this, right? It's such a backward system that's just always failed, as Curtis makes correctly with a comparison with Denmark. Denmark taxes a lot though, and it's expensive. Good. I'm glad they tax a lot. I wish we did.
I think the word holistically is an overused word. I think the comment you made about inequality or whatever, there's nothing compared to when I started in the workforce.
I mean, that's just fundamentally untrue. The larger tax rates on higher earners previously, first of all, meant that incomes were far less unequal then than they are now, and there wasn't the ability of high earners to be able to accrue huge amounts of capital to be able to hoard assets, right? We created a rentier economy by our tax cuts for high earners when they used to be 90% and then we slashed it in the Thatcher era, right? That created a rentier economy, which is not just profoundly unfair on those who pay rent to the rich, because that further distributes wealth upwards. It's also a shit economy because it's much easier to be able to make money for free as a rentier than it is to take risks as an entrepreneur, for example, in a new business or whatever, or for the government, for example, to spend money on R&D to be innovative, to create a more productive society, right? It's much easier to speculate on a financial asset or property than it is to speculate on a new business idea that you've got. So even under a liberal capitalist model, the tax cut rentier capitalism that we have today is bad for capitalism. It just is. It's just not good capitalism, even from a liberal perspective, which is one I don't hold. I'm a socialist, and even I can see it shit.
Decades ago. To make a comparison with the Danish economy, I've travelled my entire life and lived in a number of countries, and I was also in the European Parliament for 15 years. So, you can't make a comparison there just because
I mean, you can, and he has done, and your rebuttal to this is, well, I was in the European Parliament, I've travelled to other countries. I'm like, that doesn't make you an expert on fiscal policy. That doesn't make you an expert on statecraft. Like, that's not an argument. It's essentially just, I am older, therefore I know better. See, I told you she was a Karen.
You see
I think you can, yeah.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can.
Because these systems are actually completely different.
Well, how are they, in what way are they different?
Notwithstanding, we have a population of nearly 70 million. We have...
These things scale. These things absolutely scale. Why is the population different? It's all percentage terms. That's not an argument. Again, explain how that matters, because these are all economies of scale anyway.
As I said, we have different types of workforces, and we've created different benefit systems. I think what you will find in Denmark, that people aren't basically loitering on the sofa year in and year out with actually getting a job. And what's happened here,
Why? Why is this the case? What's the reason for why the level of worklessness is lower in Denmark? Her argument is, well, we can't compare Denmark because they have lower worklessness. And I'm like, that's literally the point we made, is that they have lower worklessness, even though their welfare state is more generous. You're making our argument for us here. Well, they don't have people lazing around. Yeah, because even with that welfare being generous, they're not incentivized to do so, which is your argument for cutting welfare, is that if we made it less generous, people would be less incentivized to do so. But we've already broken that argument by looking at a population who've had access to a very generous welfare state, and it's not created a culture of worklessness.
happened here is this is where we come to the benefit system. It's the oversight on the benefit system's not been strenuous enough. There are far too many people who are on disability.
The benefits are higher in Denmark, so why is it?
It's irrelevant.
But it isn't, because you're making a statement which is X equals Y, but I want to understand the logic behind that. So why is Denmark different?
My logic is quite clear.
No, it isn't. It's clearly not clear. You've not quantified why you believe what you believe. You said, oh, well, things are different. Denmark's different. They have a different status of worklessness, right? Her argument was just, they have fewer workless people. We want you to make the argument as to why you think it is outside of the level of generosity of the welfare state.
Because you can't do like for like. What I'm saying is, we have a very generous benefit system. When I was a child, I think...
We do not have a generous benefit system. We have one of the least generous benefit systems in fucking Europe. Let me bring up the fucking Financial Times. UK social safety net amongst weakest in the rich world, analysis finds. Think tank report comes as Keir Starmer seeks to convince Labour MPs to back welfare spending cuts. Now, it's a think tank, so take it with a pinch of salt, right? But let's have a look. Britain's social safety net is one of the weakest in the rich world, and its poorest households are worse off than counterparts in Slovenia, according to an analysis that shows that jobless benefits have covered the cost of essentials in just 2 of the past 14 years, right? So people who are out of work cannot even get access to the essentials 80% of the time, over 80% of the time. A level, if your welfare state can't even cover essentials, then how is that generous? I'm sorry, she lives in Fantasyland. Like, she just says things that aren't true. Wonder what her justification for this is.
I think mothers got something like, I don't know, maternity. They didn't have any maternity leave, and they got, unfortunately, we've moved on, and they got, something for one child. The benefit system is massively comprehensive, and that's fine. But the trouble is, it's got out of control, and what we
justify this, quantify this, give me some data that quantifies this. You're just saying vibes compared to when I was young, like some totally out of touch, uneducated 80-something who literally his only answer to any reasonable complaint from a young person is something back in my day. How are these people allowed to be legislators in our parliament, in the House of Lords, whilst being able to argue their positions only from the basis of, well, I was young, it was different?
We have is a system. We'll come to the migration issue probably in a minute. But what we've done is we've had a lot of cheap labour that has come in, which that's taken the levels of earnings down at times.
It hasn't, though. There's no justification that this is the case, right? The reality is that supply-side labour market reform and the removal of trade union rights has made our entire labour market, in the search of quote flexibility, as Rishi Sunak would put it, to kneecap the bargaining power of workers. Immigrants who come in and who work, they both contribute to supply of labour and demand for commodities, right? And this is broadly a wash. Once you increase the number of people there competing for jobs, this is also increase the number of people competing for commodities. Data also bears this out as well, in that migration does not bring down wages broadly. There's been plenty of papers showing this to be true.
And that's left.
I disagree with that.
Left. Well, just let me finish. And that's left a lot of people who already live here, basically lounging on the sofa and thinking, "Well, my benefits are great. Why should I get out of bed? Why should I get out of bed for another 20 quid a week?" And we've got to get rid of that mentality, because it's the same.
But you're
people
using
who seem to
anecdote.
And again, she's saying that this is a mentality that's been created by the welfare state, when surely if that heuristic was correct, the more generous welfare states would see higher levels of worklessness, as there is a higher incentive to be at home not working. That is not true. That heuristic does not have any real-world application because of the example brought up by Curtis.
You're not looking at the facts.
People
I've told you the
who seem
facts.
to be contributing to this economy year in and year out, and a lot of them are actually older.
But what about his point that he made then? So Curtis was suggesting this wealth tax on what he's saying, your billionaires, your people like that. What?
Michelle, this is the old chestnut, and I have to tell you, since the last budget, the number of millionaires and people who do create wealth in this country and employ people have been leaving.
That's actually.
I mean, millionaires aren't even wealth creators. Labourers are wealth creators. People who go out and be productive. People who go out and do the work that creates the wealth of civilization. They create wealth. Most millionaires just speculate on assets, especially in our economy.
I want to tackle that myth. That's not true. So basically, individual millionaires...
let me finish the sentence and then you can come
but you've
back.
spoken for quite a while. So individual millionaires have left, but it's the assets.
Right, hang on, pack it in, you two.
It's the assets that matter. We're also going to have the first trillionaire.
Isn't it
the old chestnut about a billionaire or somebody's rich? Who the hell do you think employs people? It's people very often.
Mostly small businesses and medium-sized businesses. You can't even get her story, her narrative, to be consistent. At the start of it, Waitrose is terrible for putting the cost of national insurance higher on small and medium businesses who employ most of the people in this country. Oh, but actually, no, it's the billionaires and it's the multi-millionaires, it's the oligarchs that employ people. But you said before it was the small business owners, which is broadly true. Right? Most millionaires and billionaires, rich people in this country, are asset owners. They own financial instruments and property. It's very rarely people with huge share portfolios, right? There are super rich people who get paid high salaries at Tesco. They should be fucking absolutely get taxed more in my mind, right? But the reality is that the super rich are not employers. They're not. A lot of the time, right?
Who've started with very little, put their house on the line.
But you're speaking in platitudes. I'm looking at the data, and the data suggests that we're going to have the world's first trillionaire.
Talking to people.
What do you say to the fact that we're going to have the world's first trillionaire?
I think the problem here, Curtis, if you're still watching, is you can't appeal to these people that inequality is bad because they just don't care. They just do not care that inequality exists because to them it is the way the market has deigned to allow the chips to fall, and anyone who upends that is denying the market the right to do that because their only heuristic, again, for whether or not an economy is functioning is has the market cleared or not, rather than what is the social utility of the society that we've created and the distribution of resources within that society, right? They don't see it from that perspective. So you're not going to be able to make that case to her. You're not going to be able to argue to her that it's actually really bad that there's a trillionaire. She's like, yeah, fine, there's a trillionaire. The market's cleared. My heuristic has been solved here. And also I think this is a pivot away from the reality here, which is we need to be nailing back down on the problems that we have with welfare and the generosity of the welfare state, right? Which is the crux of this argument, which again, she has provided literally zero evidence that welfare cuts would increase labour force participation other than vibes, and yet Curtis has come with real-world information that debunks her hypothesis. She's not responded.
Yeah, and you're telling me that inequality isn't a problem.
Why shouldn't we have a trillionaire?
Who's the first trillionaire? Who's that going to be?
Why shouldn't we have a trillionaire and billionaires? Why shouldn't we?
Because, okay, so
who is
the way...
just put some...
I don't know, I've got two questions I want to... The first is why shouldn't we have a trillionaire?
Why shouldn't we?
Wealth doesn't come out of nowhere, it's redistributed. When you get trillionaires, it's off the backs of the workers. Wages are low, not high. In Denmark, they're high. I mean, you're an ex-trade unionist, I thought you might appreciate that. So the fact is that we are going to get...
from you.
Well, we're going to get gross... We have gross levels of inequality. But again, it's not about penalising people. Now, in terms of your idea that millionaires are leaving, individual millionaires who claim non-dom, who aren't paying taxes, are going, so what? But they can't take their assets assets with them. And that is where people are making
The
a lot of their
laws
money.
have been
It's through
changed
assets,
on
it's through
non-doms.
housings, all these things.
The laws have been
But non-doms is a very small part of it.
The laws have been changed on tightening up what people should pay in tax.
If we don't
A
address
small
the gross levels of
proportion of the
inequality, people are
workforce
going to get
in this
poorer.
country
We need
pay
more
a
money.
huge-
Stop
We need more money in
talking over each
people's
other.
pockets so they can spend it into the economy. It's very simple.
Of those that generate wealth in this country pay a lot more tax.
She's not even made a case as to why her millionaire mates are the ones who create wealth. She's not made any argument for this. Again, all she's talking here is from blind faith. When in reality, Curtis is making the argument here that productivity is the source of the wealth that's created, right? Billionaires and millionaires existing is a result of how we have decided that we distribute the gains of that productivity. And the argument, of course, is that there is no social utility for having this. It has democratic consequences in terms of relationships to power within democracy. There's the problems of the way in which it distorts markets by changing the ways in which people compete with each other to be able to own assets. And it allows people to have leverage over the rest of the entire economy in terms of the assets that they own and people's access to them, like with the case of landlords. There are so many negative externalities for wealth inequality, and these arguments are very easy to be able to make. And what's her argument? It's just like, well, these people are wealth creators. Well, you've not even demonstrated that this is the case. It is blind faith. It is received wisdom that rich people create jobs, when of course that isn't true. Demand creates jobs. Demand is what creates jobs there, and then the supply meets that demand, right? If anything should tell you that demand-side economics has been the big winner of the two experiments that we had, of demand-side economics up until 1979 from Second World War, from supply-side economics from 1979 till today, which one had high aggregate growth? Which one had high increases in prosperity? Which one saw more people getting access to a middle class level of existence? Well, of course, it was demand side economics. The supply side economics has just immiserated the working people of this country and created a cabal of super rich people who control democracy. We've got to the stage where the normal functioning of a healthy economy is seen as communist and Marxist. Exactly, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Again, but this is because in the post-Soviet era, in the end of history period, right, all material analysis got beaten out of public discourse. Liberalism is the only game in town post-1991.
I'm not talking about income tax, I'm talking about a wealth tax.
There's other tax.
But also workers generate an income as well.
I'll just say this, because it's clearly like talking to a wall. What we've always said about the left is they're great at spending other people's money. And you have no concept.
No, the rich spend other people's money because they have been given the surplus value generated by the working people that they employ, or the rent that they have extracted because they have more power within a market because of the assets that they own. Again, assets that they have been able to have access to because we slashed tax rates in the 1980s, right? And again, as has been pointed out, she's having a go at Curtis for not having evidence when she has literally only come here with vibes, pure vibes and nothing else. I do not know how you didn't absolutely lose your mind here, Curtis. And we're only on the first topic.
Have no concept on what people have done in this country, the likes of the Alan Sugars and others, who from kids of 15 years old put their lives on the line to create the wealth and to build this country up.
Workers.
Alan Sugar owns a property empire. He doesn't do any work. All of the net wealth of Alan Sugar is basically all in Amsprop. Like, Amsprop is literally just a commercial property venture. He's a landlord. He's just a giant fucking landlord. He doesn't work. He's basically economically inactive at this point. Sure, maybe when Amstrad were making computers and they were spending some time innovating, sure, maybe the fact that he had the seed capital to be put in, maybe we should have him some remuneration if you're going to do liberal capitalism, right? Fair enough. I'll give him that little pass, right? But because our tax rate on him was so low, the wealth that he generated from that, and of course from the surplus value of the actual innovators within Amstrad who made the computers that he then made profit from, he's then been able to use all that surplus value, which didn't get taxed back, to buy property and then rent it out from people, and then rent it to people, and then essentially turned money into money whilst doing no work, right? I have no problem, really, before we've transitioned to socialism, the idea that someone who invests capital in innovative business should get some remuneration, just not all of it, and not so much that they then become so wealthy they buy up all the property and use that to turn money into money. That's the problem, right? That's the problem that I have here. Of course, you say put their lives on the line. Well, their lives being, if I fail, I just become a worker like everyone else.
You do realise that workers also
I
create
was
the wealth.
a worker. What jobs have you done? What jobs have you done since you left
don't try and
university?
evade the point.
No,
The
no,
question
no.
I want to
Let's decide what you've done.
the question I want
Hang
to
on,
ask you
pack it
is,
into what's the
if
question?
workers have more money in their pockets, they can spend it.
Do you
If
think
they're
we don't
spending
know?
right,
Do you think we don't know?
so when inequality is worse and people are getting
Well,
poorer,
let me just
that is
ask
why.
you.
And those small businesses,
Yeah,
by the way,
let's just
they
say,
are not
what jobs have you
rehiring.
done since you
They are
left
not.
school?
They are not rehiring after people being let go. They can't afford.
Listen, you two, you need.
And again, it's worth pointing out, right, is that the reason why the right have been so mad about fiscal expansion, going, oh, the value of our money is going down because governments are printing loads of money. As has been pointed out by Yanis Varoufakis, right, the rentier economy that we've created, now it was like neo-feudal, then became techno-feudal in his mind. I think neo-feudal is a fine way of describing it, right? But in a rentier economy where people don't create things, they make money out of money and rent. That takes money out of the economy. It takes money out of productivity. Governments have been forced into these continual expansionary policies, all the quantitative easing policy of the 2010s, right, that George Osborne used to bump up asset values by giving it to banks, giving it to the rich. That was used to essentially pad aggregate demand in the economy because there wasn't enough consumption to be able to keep the economy ticking to spend money. Otherwise, we'd have gone into recession and potentially deflation. That was what was necessary, because if you're taking money out through rent and pumping it back into assets, there's not enough consumption to keep the economy ticking over. And of course, because the quantitative easing went into bank reserves, they had loads of money to lend to the poor people who had to borrow money to consume, right? Remember what was said at the start of the programme? That we have high levels of private debt consumption-led growth throughout the 2010s, right? Not the growth was high, but the high amount of what growth we did get was from private sector debt for consumers. That's the reality, is that we have literally had to pump money into the economy from the central bank into the pockets of the banks to be able to lend money to poor people to be able to survive with the shitty wages that have been caused by austerity and supply-side labour market reform and neoliberal economics. It is important that workers are able to consume, as Curtis rightly points out here. I do apologise, future YouTube viewers, for the amount I've interrupted here, but she says so much wrong stuff. She says so many wrong things. I just have to debunk everything. It's going to be a real mission to edit. I do hope you know that, chat.
Right.
You haven't answered any of my questions, I'm afraid.
Right, in a minute, no one's going to be answering anyone's questions, so I'll kick you both off if you don't behave, because people at home, this is not an enjoyable experience. You've got people in the cars listening.
The worst part is when she is, well, what jobs have you done? I'm like, fucking patronising boomer wanker. Such a patronising shit. Well, I'm old, I'm a baroness, I have more experience than you. Even though you've come here with data and facts and quantifiable statistics, I've come here with vibes and back in my day. Therefore, shut up and listen to me, you oik. Because she's literally gish-galloping, just throwing out platitudes and nonsense and received wisdom with no justification or quantification at all.
You've got people relaxing on the sofas in the pyjamas listening. They can't hear you if you're both shouting over each other, so you're on your fair warning now, so pack it in. I don't care what jobs he's done. His point is, he's suggesting that there's an inequality, that people are going to work. He's saying that the only people that are reaping the rewards from that are the owners of the businesses. What do you say back to that?
Well, because it's a nonsensical concept. It's a nonsensical comment. Do you think that there wasn't inequality in the communist states in Soviet Russia?
I never said anything about that. What's that got to do with this, though?
Look, because you seem to have this thinking that there's always... Of course there is.
I'm really surprised you were a trade unionist.
Look, he didn't let me finish the
Right.
point.
I mean, just see what I mean? Why it's impossible to argue with these brick walls? Oh, well, you say inequality is bad, but inequality was still bad in the Soviet Union. Checkmate, communoid. I'm like, no, we just think that the level of distribution of resources in this society has negative utility, right? At no point did Curtis ever bring up the Soviet Union or command economies. Just the dumbest argument. She must have just got brain cells rotted at this point.
Because this is disrespectful to my viewers, and I'm not having my viewers disrespected. They cannot follow the conversation when you're both chipping in over the top of each other. Let me ask you a question, because I hear about this wealth tax all the time, and many viewers will sit there. I'm a capitalist, but actually when you do find out when people are structuring their affairs in a certain way and they're paying low levels of effective tax, it does feel very unfair to people. So I hear this notion about wealth tax frequently.
Yeah.
I heard it at the weekend. There was a historian TV presenter, Dan Snow, I think was his name. He was on a political panel show. and he was talking about paying the wealthy paying more tax. And he sat on national television and he said, you know, I would gladly pay more tax. I hear people like Dale Vince sitting there saying, well, I would gladly pay more tax. What I don't understand is if there is this sentiment, and it's a valid sentiment, your perspective is very valid and fair, but if it's a valid perspective that all of these wealthy people, many of them are desperate to pay more tax, why are so many of those people then not putting their money where their mouths are, voluntarily making tax payments over and above what they need to HMRC to lead by example and demonstrate how they themselves, by paying more, can help level up if that's what they're so passionate about? Because they're not doing that. They're just sitting there trying to lecture to change policy without leading by example.
That's a good question. I think if you're going to base on volunteering your taxes, how many people are going to do that? You need to make sure enough people do it. The reason why I think the tax system's broken is because the Conservatives, the Labour Party, are funded by corporations. I mean, they're taking millions and millions of pounds of health insurance companies, oil companies. They lobby our politicians to say, we want to write your tax code. So it's not about whether it works or not. It's not about whether people leave the country. It's about political will, because our political system has been controlled by the big corporates, and people are very, very angry about that.
And just as you pointed out at the start there, this idea of voluntary taxation is the dumbest thing possible, right? You tax things that you want to disincentivize. So you tax assets because you don't want people to hoard assets, right? You tax cigarettes because you don't want people to smoke cigarettes. That's one of the basic purposes of tax policy, is to direct your economy away from things you feel have negative social utility. If you make tax voluntary and you say, well, if you want to voluntarily pay tax, that's a good thing, you're essentially taxing people for being good people, who are for being generous, and therefore you're disincentivizing generosity. That is the dumbest policy proposal. Thank you, David Mitchell, for this argument, by the way. He made this on his soapbox, right? That's a really dumb argument. The whole point of society, the whole point of the social contract, and of which tax is part of that, the whole point of the social contract, of which taxes are part of, is that we all contribute. It's a collective effort. We create a society where we all have buy-in. We'll have some kind of connection to the broader economy. Neoliberalism teaches us that this shouldn't exist, and that there is no connection to the broader economy other than the individual transactions between people, but this is myopic bullshit. And of course, if you say only certain people have to pay in whether they want to, you're still incentivizing people in a system which prioritizes greed to therefore not do that. And you say, well, it would set an example for other people to pay in. I'm just like, well, then all you're going to do is going to have greedy people not getting punished and selfless people getting punished. And that's shit tax policy.
Right, final say to you on this one, Jacqueline.
Well, it's been a very fascinating debate, but the reality is, maybe the difference is, I don't look at data all the time. I've spent my entire
You said it, mate. You said it. You do not look at data. It's very, very true. You are fully feelings over facts pilled. Our unelected legislators chat for you. This is somebody who has an appointment for life in our legislature, and her position here is, I don't look at data. If anything, perfectly encapsulated the failed state we live in. There you go. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.